you are more likely to get into a car crash and die from a plane crash than just get sick from raw milk. There might not be a more controversial topic in the world of nutrition today than raw milk. And that's what I want to talk about today is raw milk. I want to break down all the data. I want to talk about the history of milk consumption and is pasteurization beneficial? Does it have its pros? Does it have its cons? What are the real statistics when it comes to consuming raw milk? And are you at risk if you're going to consume raw milk? I want to break all this down for you today. So without further hesitation, let's jump in. Now, I want to start this discussion by telling my own personal story when it comes to dairy. I grew up in a standard American household where it was normal to eat just, fast food all the time, tons of pasteurized dairy. And as I grew up, I thought it was normal to have health issues, being overweight, face full of acne, digestive issues, bloating, and gas. And of course, as you start to evolve, you learn, maybe dairy isn't the most health promoting food. At least that's what I thought. When I entered my teenage years, I was cutting out dairy because I realized at that point it was causing the digestive issues that I was experiencing. So maybe around the age of 15, 16, we switched to drinking almond milk, which had kind of just come on the market at that point. This is like 15, 20 years ago. And so when I cut out all dairy altogether, pretty drastically within just a few weeks to a couple months, most of the symptoms I had resolved entirely. I lost a lot of my acne at age 16. I experienced less bloating, less gas, less digestive issues in general. And so I was under the impression for probably a better part of a decade until my mid-20s to when I really started to realize that dairy was a problem. Like it was a massive problem for people. Until maybe about 2015, so this is about 8 years ago now, I started, just reading more, started to keep my perspectives open and really just experiment more on my health journey. Tried a ton, all the different diets. I tried probably every diet that you could think of. And so when I was experimenting, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give raw milk a try. And at this point in time, I was a sophomore in college working towards my nutrition degree, my kinesiology degree. And I was just trying to experiment with anything and everything. So when I reintroduced raw milk into my diet, I didn't experience any of the issues that I had with pasteurized dairy. And when I realized this, I started to do more research, and what I learned, it was just completely mind-blowing. And I hope to be able to share that with you today. And so what was it about the raw milk that was different than the pasteurized milk that I was consuming? Now, many people kind of chalk this up to be a placebo effect. It's just my mind saying that raw milk isn't going to cause these benefits. But as we're going to talk about today, there is so many issues with pasteurization, ultra pasteurization, and homogenization that completely changes the structure and destroys a lot of the nutrients, the enzymes in milk. And upon that research, what I learned is that I'm not alone in this. Many people, thousands, if not millions of individuals across America and across the globe don't experience the same issues with raw milk as they do with pasteurized milk. Even with that, the FDA still insists that unpasteurized milk has no probiotic effect or any other characteristic that could explain why this is the case. But the collective experience of raw milk consumers, like myself included, suggests otherwise. There was an informal survey of over 700 different families conducted, and it found that over 80% of those diagnosed with lactose intolerance no longer suffered from symptoms after switching to raw milk. So is it possible that the millions of sufferers that experience these issues from pasteurized dairy that no longer experience the issues with raw milk, is it possible that we're all just experiencing some massive placebo effect? According to this survey, over 80% of people that have lactose intolerance that don't do well with pasteurized dairy, they do well with raw milk. Is it possible that we're all just experiencing one big placebo effect? Anything is possible. But after I lay out this data today, it's all going to be a lot more clear why this is the case. All right, now I want to switch gears slightly, and I want to talk about the history of milk consumption in general. Because to paint this picture, we need to have a broad overview perspective of what's really going on here. And so scientists have ample evidence that humans began consistently drinking raw milk from animals for at least 10,000 years. However, there's actually evidence that we began consuming dairy about 49,000 years ago. This is the date that there was art found on the Witwatersrand Cave in Johannesburg, South Africa. This painting had okra mixed with milk from bovine after a fresh kill. When humans hunted, we hunted the fattest, largest animals that we could find because it provided our tribe nourishment. And so through the process of maybe accidental hunting, when we hunted that animal, odds are there was going to be milk in the mammary glands of that animal. So if we were purposely drinking milk about 10,000 years ago, you could probably guarantee that we were also consuming dairy for tens of thousands of years before that, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But the bulk of the evidence that really suggests that we started consuming dairy is around the agricultural revolution, about 10,000 years ago, because this is when the evidence suggests that we consumed milk of the greatest quantity. This is found in pottery vessels, the dental remains of Neolithic humans, and bone analysis of animal remains. Even ancient baby bottles have provided evidence that showed that milk from animals was used to feed human infants about 8,000 years ago. But I ask the question, why would humans have consumed milk from other animals at this point in our human existence? Like, what would the benefit be? Well, milk is a regenerating resource. When you kill an animal for your tribe, you only have so many calories that you can get from that animal before it's gone. However, milk, what humans have done is actually pretty incredible. We still have modern day hunter-gatherer tribes that do this today, but milk is a renewable resource. You can herd animals, goats, sheep, cows, bison, and as long as that animal is lactating for 9 months out of the year, you can constantly renew that milk source. So it was a steady supply of nutrients, and this prolonged life. This helped our ancestors to thrive and pass on their genetic code to their offspring. And the tribes that consume milk had a direct competitive advantage over the tribes that didn't consume milk, because it meant that we could get more nutrition. We had a reliable source of nutrition because they didn't have grocery stores. They couldn't just walk down the road. They couldn't pull up their phone and call up Uber Eats. They had their own type of Uber Eats, and it was dairy. So if the risk of consuming raw milk were all that great, then why did raw milk consumption get passed down through millennia? If the risk were that great to our species, wouldn't we have stopped consuming raw milk way back when, 10,000 years ago? So there obviously has to have been some sort of traditional preparation method, or the stats are way overblown. And as you're going to come to find out, it's a little bit of both. And so I really want to reiterate that if the risk were all that problematic for us as a species, either we would have died out a long time ago, or we would have just stopped consuming it because our ancestors would have realized that this is a food that harms us, not helps us. So why is it that they passed it down generation to generation to us in present day? And why did we start pasteurizing the milk in the first place? That's something I really want to break down today, and I think you're going to be surprised at why we started pasteurizing the milk in the first place. Now, with that being said, milk has been a way to not just get nutrition in, but it's also been used across the globe as a way to heal and recover from issues. Physicians like Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, and others used raw milk to cure a wide range of diseases. Hippocrates advised tuberculosis sufferers to drink raw milk in quantity. In the Ayurvedic medicine of India, milk is used in the practice of brahmana, meaning to buck up or nourish the body. It's also used in Rasayana to rejuvenate the body, and in Vajrakarana to promote sexual function and fertility. The hare, known as the Cochatine, living in northwestern Canada, are, quote, reported to relish moose mammary glands when the female is lactating in the summer. The Chippewa tribe savored the udders of milk-giving does so much that they consumed them on the spot when an animal was killed. Even anthropologist Lorna Marshall documented how the Ikung Bushmen of the Kalahari would give the udders from their kills to the elderly because they were soft. Another anthropologist, Kirsten Idlutz Kuljak, recorded how the Inuit cooked ringed seal pup stomachs when they were full of milk after they nursed from their mothers and noted how the final product tasted like cheese. And then even ancient physicians prescribed raw milk as a gentle laxative to cool inflammation of ulcerated tissues and as a galactagogue to increase milk production for the nursing mother. Even in modern day, the Maasai, a hunter-gatherer tribe in northern Kenya, have found a way to mix milk and blood without killing the cow. This is actually a very smart thing that they have done over their millennia, over their lineage. They are able to milk the cow and they puncture the neck of the cow in such a way that they are able to get the blood out, but then they just stuff a little bit of dirt in there and the cow goes on living for the next month, and they cycle through the cattle until the next month when they use that first cow again. And they mix it together and make this concoction of milk and blood, and they've been doing this for as long as we know of. Now, even in the US, the United States, raw milk has been used for 150 years to treat a wide range of conditions and is still used today in some hospitals in European and other countries. Now, why am I telling you about all these instances of traditional cultures and even the US using raw milk as medicine, basically? These were not cherry-picked or one-off instances throughout history where individuals used raw milk to treat illnesses or to nourish the body. This happened in virtually every culture that you can find across the globe. So if we have instances like this where raw milk was used to treat sick individuals and to nourish people throughout history, then how can it be that raw milk is so terrible for us now? These ancient physicians and traditional culture tribes still thrive off of raw milk today. But why is it only problematic for us living in more civilized societies today? That's what I'm going to break down in a few sections to come. Because raw milk throughout history has always been seen as a food that is going to help heal and nourish the body. But since the start of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1800s, this is when things seriously started to go downhill for the worse. Now, before the past 100, 150 years, dairy has pretty much always been raw. It's been prepared traditionally through making yogurt and kefir and other forms of fermented dairy products that I'm going to talk about soon. But dairy has always been raw because pasteurization was invented in 1862 by Louis Pasteur. And pasteurization wasn't invented for milk. It was actually kind of invented by a little bit of an accident, but mainly for beer and wine production. And now, at this point in time, in the mid-1800s to the late 1800s, we really started to, if you know anything about American history, we really started to expand our population. We had maybe less than 1 billion humans across the globe at that point. We're now at 8 billion, but we had less than 1 billion humans across the globe. America, the United States, was still relatively new. We were westward expanding. We were building the railroads. We were moving west. We were building cities. We were grouping closer together. We were doing all of these things that made living conditions more unsanitary. We were just starting to put in a large part of the plumbing and piping infrastructure, because most of the pipes we have in our major cities today were built during the Lincoln administration. So during this time in the mid to late 1800s, a lot was happening for our population, for the United States. So as you can imagine, we just couldn't raise cattle in grass anymore. We just couldn't raise them like grass-fed animals. We had at one point over 60 million bison roaming the Great Plains of Northern America. But that is a whole discussion in and of itself, and I have other videos talking about this. But they were slaughtered because the American army wanted to get rid of them to basically starve the natives that lives here in America. And so they would sell the hides, and it was terrible that we experienced this. I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't heard of this before. But we just couldn't raise cows on pasture because of how fast our cities were growing. We were building high-rise buildings. You just can't raise cows like that on pasture. And so this is when swill dairies became wildly popular. Swill dairies were conceived as a way to maximize profits and oftentimes at the expense of safe dairy. Because cows couldn't be really raised on pasture, take New York City, for example. Cows were raised in really confined areas, confined spaces, oftentimes built right next to distilleries, alcohol distilleries, so cows could easily be fed the grain mash, which was called swill, left over from alcohol production. And because New York City didn't exactly have an abundance of grazing pastures and shipping in natural food was too expensive, this was a pretty ingenious way for the distillers to make money and also to feed the cattle at the same time. Now, what they did was they attached metal sheds to their facilities and piped out hot cereal byproducts as feed for the cows. This was pretty ingenious for them because they could both produce milk in the city and they could profit off of their waste from their distilleries. These cows were kept in absolute horrible, miserable conditions that we've never ever raised our cows in before. Only in modern society, in cities, have we ever raised our cows in this type of condition. Cows have always, all animals have always been raised on pasture, which completely changes the outcome of that animal. Think about if you were raised in one type of environment and completely changed to living in another type of environment, how your body would change. And you would start sweating out toxins, you would smell worse. The same thing for these cows. Because they were kept in miserable, filthy conditions, they were fed this unnatural waste. They produced a bluish, foul-smelling milk. And I want to read you an excerpt from the Atlas Obscura talking about how messed up this really is. Quote, "Swill-fed cows were said to produce between 5 and 25 times more milk than their grass-fed counterparts, perhaps because the impurities of the animal's body passed off with the milk. It was a diet solely consisting of swill that proved particularly damaging to the cows. When introduced to the boiling liquid, cows typically refused to eat it for a few days until desperation drove them to consume the slop. A diet consisting exclusively of the swill made the cows sick, led to ulcerated sores all over their bodies, and caused their tails to fall off. Because the resulting liquid was thin and had an unnatural bluish tint, vendors stirred in additives such as chalk, flours, eggs, plaster of Paris, and even cow brains to achieve a slightly more agreeable color and consistency." This just goes to show what man can do to another species and how this is a man-made problem. We had ancient physicians in traditional cultures across the globe for millennia who drank raw milk, who thrived off of raw milk and yogurts and kefirs and cheeses. But when we start introducing this man-made problem, putting cows into confined spaces, feeding them an unnatural diet, raising them in their own filth, what do you think the outcome is going to be? Oh, let me show you what that outcome is. By the late 1830s, this swill dairy made up between 50 and 80% of all milk consumed in America's large northeastern cities. This made up a majority of the milk that humans were consuming. This terrible, disgusting milk. Now, this milk was marketed as pure country milk or fresh country milk, and it sickened and killed thousands of people that consumed it, mainly children. As you can imagine, because westward expansion was in full progress, we didn't have refrigerators invented at this point. We didn't have grocery stores. I don't think air conditioning was invented at this point. The milk that was made, not only was it foul, disgusting milk, but we also couldn't find a way to store it and refrigerate it, so it would go bad rather quickly. But not only that, we had a culture that was entirely removed from traditional preparation methods of how to safely consume milk and how to traditionally prepare these foods to consume them safely. For instance, turning raw milk into kefir, yogurt, and cheese is a traditional preparation method that makes it easier to digest and safer to consume. Same thing with making sourdough bread. You're fermenting the grains, fermenting off a lot of the defense chemicals, making those grains easier to digest and giving you probiotics along with it. The same could be said for turning cabbage into sauerkraut, soaking and sprouting your nuts and seeds. But we had men just trying to make a profit, business owners who wanted to find a way to make a profit off of convenience. They didn't care about people's health. They were just trying to hit their bottom line. And the end result was thousands of people dying. The New York Times attributed more than 8,000 deaths per year from this milk, mostly to children. And because of this, of course, there was a huge push for better regulations for milk at that time. This is still about the 1850s to late 1800s. And we were trying to figure out, how can we make this milk healthier, less dangerous for people to consume? Now, it was raw, but it was raised in terrible conditions. Now, there's a couple different solutions that were proposed at this time. How can we make the milk safer to consume? And because pasteurization was recently invented in 1862, that was one of the solutions proposed. The other solution was actually raising healthy cows in a clean environment. But this was quickly dismissed because you can't really raise cows efficiently in a healthy environment and feed the fast-growing population that we had. So ultimately, pasteurization was that method that was ushered in to address this issue, this man-made issue. It answered the question of how to commercialize dirty milk rather than spending the time and energy it would take to produce clean milk from healthy cows. Now, I just want to reiterate this point. We would not have needed to start pasteurizing our milk if it wasn't for this issue in the first place. Pasteurization is a technological solution to a man-made problem. We have thrived off of raw milk for years. It was passed down for thousands of years, for millennia, with very little occurrence of these issues. If it was more of a risk than it was a reward, we wouldn't have passed it down this far in our human species. But because man entered civilization and started creating swill dairies with terrible conditions for milk, it tainted the entire idea of dairy altogether. Now, there's several different types of pasteurization. The first type of pasteurization that started out was a low temperature, long time process, LTLT. This is also called batch pasteurization or vat pasteurization. This is where the milk is heated to about 145 degrees for 30 minutes. Now, 145 degrees Fahrenheit is just above drinking coffee temperature. I drink my coffee at about 135, so 145 is not that hot. However, by the year 1882, this started to fall out of fashion because we started to use a different pasteurization method, all for the sake of convenience. We started using high temperature, short time pasteurization, HTST, high temperature, short time. Instead of using 145 degrees for 30 minutes, we now bumped it up to 162 degrees Fahrenheit for just 15 seconds. So then ultimately, in 1886, a German agricultural chemist, Franz von Soxhlich, that's very fun to say, was the first person to suggest that milk be sold to the public always be pasteurized. But even still, in 1891, 5 years after he suggested that, 1 in every 4 infants in New York City, where these swill dairies were very popular, many of them died. 1 in 4. 1 in 4 infants died from drinking this tainted milk. But when pasteurization was introduced to New York City, this dropped to about 1 in 14 infants dying from drinking milk. So this pasteurization saved a lot of lives. But remember, this was from a man-made issue, not just naturally occurring issue. This is from a man-made issue. Now, in 1908, Chicago became the first city to legally require that milk had to be pasteurized before being sold in stores. Now, by 1912, the American public health official Milton Rosenau established standards for low-temperature pasteurization. This was the heating of the 145 for about 30 minutes. And so we don't have clear regulations yet on what really we should be doing. Only Chicago at this point has become the first city to legally require this be sold in stores. But because this low-temp pasteurization process wasn't scalable, it's not that convenient for the producer, by the 1960s, this has really fallen out of style. In order to speed up the process, manufacturers created ultra-high temp pasteurization, which heats the milk up to about 280 degrees to 302 degrees for 2 to 5 seconds. And so, to paint that picture, boiling is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. This is above that, but they would flash heat it for about 2 to 5 seconds. because it needed to be quicker. It needed to be more convenient, more doable for the manufacturer. And as we're going to talk about to come, different pasteurization methods change the quality of the milk drastically based off of what method you're using. A vat pasteurization, like this low temp, long time, actually doesn't really damage the milk as much as ultra pasteurization will. Now, moving on, I want to talk about the pros and cons of pasteurized and homogenized milk. This is the creation of Franken milk. Now, pasteurization, nothing sums this up better than a quote. Kate Greenleckie, an Australian microbiologist and immunologist, said, quote, "I am not here to villainize pasteurized milk, but to understand the cost of it." Now, I'm here talking about the stats from an unbiased perspective, because that's what we have to do in research. We have to look at things unbiasedly and look at things throughout time and understand why these things occur. And I'm not here to villainize pasteurization because it saved lives from a man-made issue. But at the same time, is there a cost to pasteurization? Is there a cost to homogenization, which I'm going to talk about? And that cost isn't very well understood by the researchers. It's definitely not very well understood by the general public. Going back to my story and that survey of over 700 families, there's obviously some sort of issue going on with pasteurized milk to cause issues in individuals. The gas, the bloating, making the milk not as digestible or absorbable, causing the digestive issues that we're experiencing. Yet, is there some benefit to drinking raw milk that doesn't cause these issues in those individuals as well? So that's what I'm here to answer. I'm not here to demonize pasteurized milk because everything has its place and its value. We need to understand that. Everything has its place and its value. But at what cost is this coming with? Is it appropriate to just recommend everybody drink this newly invented, heated, ultra high temp pasteurized milk? Now, we need to discuss this and break down these stats and talk about the dangers that pasteurized milk has. And so to understand pasteurized milk, this is an invention that has its consequences, just like anything has its consequences. I ask, what are the consequences of this, of pasteurization? Because man creates a problem and then tries to solve that problem by creating another invention, upon which that invention will cause more downstream problems. We will need more inventions to try and solve those problems. When is that cycle going to end? And I think, and it's my hope, to educate people enough to understand to just come back to the basics. As hippie as this sounds, we need to come back to nature, come back to traditional living, ancestral living, because nature is never wrong. When we live in tune with our biology and what our genes expect, good health is the byproduct of that. But when we start creating problems, when man starts creating problems like these swill dairies, they create issues. And then we need to try and invent something else to fix that problem that stemmed from that invention. We created swill dairies, and that caused issues. And the solution wasn't to create sustainable, more cleaner living situations for the cattle, which is their natural environment, which is how they've always lived. The solution was to use this new invention of pasteurization to boil the milk essentially, to kill off all the bacteria, the good and the bad. But what solution are we going to create to correct the consequences of pasteurization, and so on and so forth? So the answer would not be to try and keep creating inventions to solve the problem. The answer would be to just go back to doing what we were doing before these problems arise in the first place. Now, going back and talking about pasteurization. Pasteurization, yes, it kills the bad bacteria, but it doesn't get rid of them. When you're drinking pasteurized milk, you're still drinking all the dead bacteria present in that milk. And pasteurization makes the milk a lot harder to digest. Raw milk contains many beneficial bacteria. You might have heard that raw milk contains just bad bacteria, but raw milk contains a ton of beneficial bacteria, probiotics, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and a lot of other probiotics like that. Now, what I'm going to talk about to come is that one reason why individuals might be better able to handle and break down raw milk compared to pasteurized milk is because of this. Now, raw milk doesn't have lactase present in it, but what it has is a ton of beneficial bacteria, probiotics in it. And these probiotics, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, they create the lactase from your gut bacteria. And when you're drinking raw milk that contains these beneficial bacteria, you're able to make lactase that breaks down the milk sugar lactose. And so when you're drinking pasteurized milk that's basically killed off all the bacteria in there, and you're lactose intolerant, which over 65% of the population is lactose intolerant, you're not going to be able to break down that milk sugar lactose. And so you're going to end up with the gas and blast and bloating and digestive issues. But the reasoning that most people experience the benefits of drinking raw milk and they don't have these issues is because raw milk still contains these beneficial probiotics, bifidobacteria and lactobacillus, because it's creating lactase from the digestive tract. But when it comes to the bad bacteria present in raw milk, you're probably thinking it's horrible. It's terrible. Bad bacteria in raw milk. It's killed so many people. It's caused so many illnesses. We're going to talk about that to come, and it might surprise you how blown out of proportion this really is. Now, not only does pasteurization kill all of these bacteria, the good and the bad, it's kind of like an antibiotic. You take it and it just wipes out everything. It's like a nuke that just wipes it all out. But pasteurization also denatures all the proteins that are present in that milk. Milk contains over 2,500 different proteins, and pasteurization changes the shape and the structure and denatures them altogether, making the milk not as absorbable, not as digestible, and it's literally not the same thing. That's why I called it Franken milk, because pasteurization changes the structure of these proteins. Now, there's different types of pasteurization, like I talked about, and different types of pasteurization methods change these things differently. Now, one of these proteins that pasteurization changes lactose to beta lactose. It completely changes it to something different. And beta lactose has been shown to have a higher impact on your blood sugar levels. Now, lactose is the sugar that most people, most humans can't break down. But even worse, when you pasteurize milk, you're going to change that lactose into beta lactose, something completely different. And this has been shown to have a higher impact on blood sugar levels. Not only that, but pasteurization has been shown to significantly reduce the nutrition content of many vitamins and minerals. Even the FDA has acknowledged that certain vitamins and minerals are degraded when milk is heated, such as copper, iron, vitamin C, B vitamins, and vitamin A. When it comes to vitamin A in particular, one heat-sensitive protein, beta-lactoglobulin, helps increase the intestinal absorption of vitamin A. But this protein is destroyed during pasteurization, and it's been shown that vitamin A is not well absorbed when the milk has been pasteurized. This has been shown in countless studies. So if you think you're getting a lot of vitamin A in pasteurized milk, you're probably not. But you are going to get it in raw milk, and you're going to get all these other nutrients in their most bioavailable forms at their peak capacity when you're getting raw milk from a reputable source that's been grass-fed and grass-finished. Now, you've heard me say the word homogenization. What is that? How's it different than pasteurization? Homogenization is the process used to mix and disperse milk fat globules in order to prevent milk from separating and give it a more homogeneous texture. Now, homogenized milk, it was invented in 1899 at the peak of really trying to pasteurize milk, but it didn't start getting incorporated into supermarkets until the 1920s. And for the most part, it's there to prolong shelf life, but it's really just to make the milk look prettier. Because when you have raw milk, you have a layer of cream. The milk fat is sitting on top of the milk. But homogenization pushes the milk cream, all this fat, through tight tubules, and it basically makes the milk fat smaller, these smaller little globules that basically it's able to disperse throughout the milk, so it's more of a homogeneous mixture. And what are the issues that homogenization has on milk? Now, there's over 400 different types of fatty acids found in milk. And since the fat is broken up and the fat molecules are smaller, they are not as slowly digested in the digestive tract. They're going to go straight to the bloodstream. And if you are somebody that is lactose intolerant, that has a susceptibility to an autoimmune issue, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, psoriasis, irritable bowel disease, like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, your immune system is going to recognize those milk proteins, those milk fat molecules in your bloodstream as foreign invaders, and is going to mount up an immune response. So many individuals that have autoimmunity, they see a lot of great improvements when they cut out pasteurized dairy altogether, myself included. But when you reintroduce raw milk into the diet, because it's not homogenized, it's not pasteurized, you don't see the issues. And this is not just based off of placebo. In my own personal anecdote, suffering from skin issues, I get terrible autoimmune skin issues when I consume pasteurized, homogenized dairy. But when I consume raw milk, up to 1 to 2 gallons per week, I consume a few pounds of yogurt per week, I consume kefir every single week, raw cheese every single week. I consume a ton of raw dairy products every single week, and I have been doing it since about 2015, and I have not experienced these autoimmune issues. And many hundreds, thousands, even millions of people say the same thing. So one of the solutions might be to swap out your pasteurized and homogenized dairy for raw milk, but you still might be concerned. Isn't raw milk bad? Is it going to kill me? What is it going to make me sick? That's what I want to talk about next. Hey guys, I wanted to take a quick break and tell you about something I have been absolutely obsessed with probably for about a couple years now. This is a food that is one that I am going to keep in my diet for a long time because of the immense amount of health benefits that it contains. This is a food that we have consumed as humans for millennia, and modern day is finally catching up with the ancestral wisdom because the science on this particular food is mind-blowing. It is just outrageous, the science that is coming out with this food. I consume this every day. Bethany consumes this every day. Our dog Coda consumes this every day. And this incredible superfood that I'm talking about is honey. Now, honey is completely different than simple processed and added sugars that we might think about in Western culture, because I think we like to put things in boxes. You know, if it's a sugar, all sugar's the same. However, honey is different. This is built different, and here's a study to prove it. This is a 2017 study titled Honey and Health, a review of recent clinical research, and the authors concluded this review by saying, the ingredients of honey have been reported to exert antioxidant, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, anti-proliferative, anti-cancer, and anti-metastatic effects. This is just a massive review that studied dozens of studies of honey throughout the years that found that honey is truly a magical superfood and one that we have consumed for a very, very long time. And there was another study published in the International Journal of Biological Sciences titled Honey, a Novel Anti-Diabetic Agent, that found that honey is truly a unique substance that helps individuals that have diabetes. And you're probably thinking, how can honey help diabetes? It's a sugar, it's gonna spike my blood sugar. Listen, honey is built different. This is a superfood that has been used for thousands upon thousands of years, and it's still used by hunter-gatherer tribes today. But here's the thing, not all honey is created equal. You can go to the supermarket and buy the little bear off the shelf, but odds are that's probably not even real honey, because believe it or not, up to 75% of all honey sold in the supermarket has been adulterated. In 2014, an investigation in the United Kingdom found that only 1 in 7 honeys found in the supermarket was actually pure and authentic. So that's why I'm a fan of ensuring that I get a high quality honey in my diet from one company and one company only, and that is Beekeepers Naturals. I've been consuming this superfood honey for 3 years now, and it has been absolutely game-changing for me and my diet. I love to mix it in smoothies, put it in some hot chocolate at night. I love to drizzle it on my yogurt bowls. Now, the reason I love this superfood honey so much is because that it's not just honey. This contains royal jelly, raw bee pollen, and bee propolis extract. These are all incredibly beneficial for our immune system, and each come with a host of benefits unique to those ingredients. And Beekeepers Naturals is really doing things the complete right way. They've had all their products third-party tested to be free of glyphosate, GMOs, preservatives, added fillers, and simple refined sugars. So if you want to grab yourself some of this superfood honey or any other product that Beekeepers Naturals carries, just click that link below and use code Craig15 to get 15% off your entire order. Like I said, I use this product every single day. I use the propolis throat spray when I'm feeling a little off or when I have to travel. These are just nice things to have on hand, and I truly can trust this company wholeheartedly. Now let's get back to the episode. When you hear about raw milk in the media, you're often going to hear about all these dangerous headlines that raw milk will make you sick, it'll kill you, it contains all these harmful bacteria, Brucella, E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella, all these other types of pathogenic bacteria. But what do the stats actually say? You might have even seen a recent CDC study where they claim that the majority of dairy-related disease outbreaks are linked to raw milk. The CDC report claimed that unpasteurized milk is 150 times more likely to cause foodborne illness than pasteurized milk. And those outbreaks had a hospitalization rate 13 times higher than those involving pasteurized dairy products. Let's talk about this study that the CDC had. This time frame was limited between the years 1993 and 2006. Remember this time frame because we're going to touch back up on this at a later date using a much wider time frame. Now, to get this number, raw milk caused 150 times more illnesses. This isn't deaths. This is illnesses than pasteurized milk. How did they get this number? How did they come to this conclusion of 150 times more? That sounds very alarming. Well, what they did is they used old data that showed that 1% of the population drinks raw milk. However, by the CDC's own reports, that number is well over 3%, and it's probably well over 5% at this point in time in 2023. Using a lower number, like 1% compared to 3%, this would drastically skew the end result. But now the craziest part, they also used data from outbreaks and illnesses associated with bathtub cheese. Bathtub cheese. This is queso fresco. This cheese was made illegally at home, pretty much in filthy conditions, just like we had those swill dairies. This is not ancestrally consistent on how raw dairy is gathered from the farm and how traditional cultures, this is a huge disrespect to how traditional cultures have always made their dairy products, their cheese, their aged raw cheese, their yogurts, their kefirs, their raw milk. This queso fresco that was included in this study is inherently more dangerous than raw milk, and it's associated with more serious outbreaks and illnesses. This distorts the data and makes it look like raw milk from your local farm is more dangerous than it actually is. And let's just take note that properly aged raw milk cheese has never once been implicated in a disease outbreak. So now I ask the question, what happens if you look at the data? What are the results if you exclude the bathtub cheese and you raise the percentage of Americans that consume raw milk from 1% to just 3%? Because tens of millions of Americans are regularly consuming raw dairy products every single day. That number is well above 3%, but we're going to be conservative and just go 3%. What does the data look like on that? Let's check this out. Other statisticians have looked at this CDC report and asked the same questions that I did. What happens when you remove the queso fresco? What happens when you bump up that number, the percentage of Americans, to 3%? And when they recrunch these numbers, there's roughly a 1 in 94,000 chance of becoming ill from drinking unpasteurized milk during that same period, 1993 to 2006. A 1 in 94,000 chance of becoming ill from unpasteurized milk. Now, there's roughly a 1 in 888,000 chance of becoming ill from drinking pasteurized milk. This means your relative risk is 9.4 times higher of getting sick, not dying, from drinking raw milk. This is not 150 times higher as the CDC claimed. Now, this 9.4 times greater risk of getting sick from raw milk, this is relative risk. This is not absolute risk. And so when you calculate the absolute risk, which is your risk as an individual, this number is a 1/1000% difference. Your individual risk is not 9.4 times higher. Your individual risk of getting sick from raw milk is 1/1000%. It's Michael Phelps out touching the swimmer next to him in the lane by 1/1000th of a second. It's a hair. It's a piece of paper thin. Your individual risk is so minuscule, it's not even statistically significant in peer-reviewed studies. It's negligible. Now, on the off chance that you do get sick, just how severe will that sickness be? How severe will that illness be? Well, during the same time, according to the CDC, there were 12 hospitalizations for illnesses associated with raw milk. 12. That's an average of 1.5 hospitalizations per year. With no more than 10 million people drinking raw milk, that means you have about a 1 in 6 million chance of becoming hospitalized from drinking raw milk. Now, to put that into perspective, you have a roughly 1 in 8,000 chance of dying in a car crash, which means there's a 750 times greater chance of dying in a car crash than getting sick from raw milk. You have a 1 in 2 million chance of dying in a plane crash. So you are 3 times as likely to die in a plane crash than to get sick from drinking raw milk, not die. You are more likely to get into a car crash and die from a plane crash than just get sick from raw milk. Now, that study that I just got done talking about, this was a Johns Hopkins study that ran from 1993 to 2006, reported by the CDC. This study ran from 93 to 2006, 13 years, and they said that you have 150 times greater risk of getting sick from drinking raw milk than pasteurized milk. Now, what happened during these years, and did they leave anything out? Well, other researchers asked this question, and when they ran a different study on a much longer term, almost twice as long, 1980 to 2005, a study was done. So that same time period, but just more. They went back further. In 1980 to 2005, they ran a study, and what they found is that pasteurized milk was responsible for 11% more illnesses than raw milk. Pasteurized, not raw milk, was responsible for more illnesses. But if you're still not convinced, how does the illnesses of raw milk stack up against other foods that cause foodborne illnesses? According to a recent review of foodborne disease outbreaks in the US in 2008 by the Center for Science in Public Interest, the CSPI, seafood, produce, and poultry were associated with the most outbreaks. Dairy products were at the complete bottom of the list. They caused the fewest outbreaks and illnesses of all major food categories: beef, eggs, poultry, produce, and seafood. When you look at the chart, dairy is at the complete bottom of the list. You are going to see that fish and shellfish, poultry, eggs, beef, pork, and produce all have a much greater risk of getting sick than milk. And that's pasteurized and raw milk together in that dairy category. The problem is when you hyper-focus on one issue so much, you zoom in and you look at raw milk and you highlight all of these issues that man has created with milk, the swill dairies, the queso fresco bathtub cheese. And when you highlight these and then you show studies about how Brucella can cause these heart issues, you show how problematic E. coli and salmonella can be, it scares people into thinking that raw milk is more dangerous than it actually is. But when you look at the rates of how many foodborne illnesses are caused from all dairy in general, compared to all these other food categories, you'll realize that dairy outbreaks are very minimal. Seafood caused 29 times more illnesses than dairy. Poultry caused 15 times more illnesses than dairy. Eggs caused 13 times more. Beef, 11 times more. Pork, 8 times more. And produce, 4 times more illnesses than dairy. Now, according to this report from the CSPI, they attribute 5,000 deaths to foodborne illnesses every year, with over 99% of them coming from seafood, poultry, produce, peanuts, and eggs. Dairy accounts for less than 1% of all deaths. Now, only a handful of those deaths came from dairy, and it was from pasteurized dairy. Not a single death has been reported from raw dairy since the mid-1980s. And this is despite the fact that over tens of millions of people regularly consume raw dairy in America today. And now, according to the CDC, Between the years 1990 and 2006, there were 24,000 foodborne illnesses reported each year on average. But by the CDC's own admission, this only represents a tiny fraction of the real amount of foodborne illnesses every single year. They said the real number is closer to 76 million foodborne illnesses every single year, which means that 99.97% of all foodborne illnesses go unreported. Yet of these 24,000 reported illnesses from the CDC, only 315 of those each year were due to dairy, both pasteurized and unpasteurized. This means that dairy was responsible for 1.3% of all foodborne illnesses during this time frame. So when you zoom out and you look at this data, you will realize that dairy, both pasteurized and unpasteurized dairy, is responsible for 1% of all foodborne illnesses. The way the media makes it seem, and the way that other TikTok influencers and health professionals make it seem, is that you're going to get drastically sick from drinking raw milk. Despite the fact that tens of millions of people regularly consume this, dairy's only responsible for less than 1% of all foodborne illnesses. You have a much higher likelihood of getting sick from chicken, from produce, from beef, from eggs, from dying in a car crash, from dying in a plane crash. You have a much higher likelihood of all these other things happening to you on a daily basis than just by drinking raw milk. According to medical researcher Dr. Ted Beals, MD, the risk of dying from raw milk is extremely low. He states you are 35,000 times more likely to get sick from these other foods than you are from raw milk. So now that we've talked about the history of milk consumption, we've talked about how swill dairies and the advent of civilization really created these man-made issues for dairy. We've talked about pasteurization, homogenization, and its downfalls. I want to ask the question, are humans designed to drink milk from another species? This is something I get all the time. Are you a baby cow? Cow milk is made for baby cows. You're not designed to drink that. And so to answer that, as we addressed in the discussion, being able to consume and use another species' milk was a survival advantage for us. It was almost by evolutionary accident have we come to thrive off of this. We are one of the only species that has learned how to cultivate another species' milk supply for our own health and well-being. It's truly remarkable when you think about it. I mean, we have done this for tens of thousands of years, and to pass it along this far in our human timeline, to be able to use this nutrition as we age is pretty remarkable for our species to do. So now you might be thinking, I'm lactose intolerant. I can't handle milk. Can I handle raw milk? Well, I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but this is something I want to touch on briefly. But we have reports that have shown that about 65%, maybe up to 3/4 of the population is lactose intolerant. This means that we lose the lactase enzyme as we age. Now, after we grow out of infancy, we grow into our early childhood years, teenage years, we lose that lactase enzyme. A majority of us do. However, there is a select few of us, about 35% of us, that possess the lactase enzyme into adulthood. This is what's known as lactase persistence. And there's archaeological evidence that shows that humans were consuming raw milk for thousands of years before the widespread appearance of the lactase persistence gene. Now, possessing this gene, being able to digest milk into adulthood, would have given clear evolutionary advantage to those individuals. They would have been able to consume and digest that milk with little to no issues. And we have good archaeological evidence that this was the case. However, as I touched on a little bit earlier, the individuals that are lactose intolerant, the individuals that don't possess this lactase persistent gene, they are still able to break down the lactose present in raw milk because raw milk contains all these beneficial probiotics that is able to basically create lactase in the digestive tract. Lactose intolerance isn't necessarily lactose intolerance. It's pasteurization intolerance, because pasteurization kills off all the bacteria, the good and the bad. So if you don't contain the lactase enzyme, you're not able to use that bacteria to create lactase like you would from raw milk. So your lactose intolerance is really just pasteurization intolerance. And that's what I was experiencing, not a placebo. That's what I was experiencing when I switched from pasteurized milk to raw milk. I'm able to handle it better. And odds are you might be able to handle it better as well. This is very individualized. And I'm not here to convince you to drink raw milk, because the truth is some people just don't do well with dairy. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. But this discussion is really there to help you to understand that if you're avoiding raw milk because you think it's going to harm you, well, the risks are very, very low. And the media blows this way out of proportion, because when you hyper focus on little issues of Brucella causing heart issues, E. coli causing digestive issues, salmonella, all these other bacteria and pathogens causing issues, and you hyper focus on that and you blow it up so much, and then you put that in the media, and then you have the CDC report saying you're 150 times more likely. Well, that's going to look like the issues are far worse than they actually are. But as we discussed today, the issues are not with raw milk. The issues are how the milk is prepared. The issues are raising the cows in a terrible, filthy living condition. And when you raise cattle in a healthy way and you take the proper precautions like our ancestors have always done to traditionally prepare the raw milk, the chance of becoming sick from raw milk is extremely low. Now, going back to this discussion on the lactase persistent gene, cultures that don't possess the lactase persistent gene, they still consume raw dairy without any issues because of what I had just mentioned. Now, what researchers believe is that this gene has spread through natural selection. This means that the reproductive capacity and or survivability of ancient raw milk drinkers was substantially increased compared to non-milk drinking populations. This is essentially what I said earlier, is that cultures that had access to milk and dairy from dairy cows, from goats, from sheep, they could live a lot longer than if they didn't have this access. It's like having no grocery store. It's like not having Uber Eats on your phone. You're not going to have access to as much food. You got to find a way to get more food. So our ancestors were the same with their Uber Eats, their cow, their sheep, whatever animal they were herding. They needed a way to have a reliable access to food. And because of this, certain populations develop this lactase persistence gene. And so the cultures that don't possess this gene, it's very likely that they were fermenting the dairy, because when you ferment the dairy into yogurt, cheese, kefir, things like that, you ferment off the lactose. So you don't need the gene to be able to break it down. That's why if you are somebody out there that is consuming yogurt or kefir or cheese, you might be better able to tolerate it than if you were to just drink a glass of milk, pasteurized milk. But cultures have known for centuries and millennium that certain foods need to be prepared properly. We kind of touched on that a little bit at the beginning of this episode. And so if you are somebody out there struggling with dairy issues, try raw, but also try consuming fermented raw dairy products, raw yogurt, raw kefir, however you want to say it, raw cheddar cheese. All these things make it easier to digest and to help absorption. And you're getting a host of beneficial probiotics along with it, because when you ferment a product, you're increasing the amount of probiotics in there that not only helps digestion, helps absorption, but you're improving the health of your gut as well. Now, I want to wrap up this episode and I want to touch on the benefits of raw milk. Benefit number one is that it's going to contain higher levels of nutrients than pasteurized milk. There's many studies out there that show that raw milk is going to contain more fat-soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, and K2. It's going to contain more conjugated linoleic acid, CLA. Raw milk is also going to contain higher levels of omega-3s. Omega-3s are more anti-inflammatory compared to omega-6s, as well as raw milk is going to provide high amounts of vitamin B2 and other B vitamins. Raw milk is also going to contain higher amounts of butyrate. Butyrate is especially rich from raw milk from grass-fed and finished animals. This is a short-chain fatty acid that's widely known to control health issues related to inflammation, slow metabolism, and stress resistance. Now, benefit number two of consuming raw milk is that it potentially could reduce allergies and asthma. Studies suggest that children who drink raw milk are 50% less likely to develop allergies and 41% less likely to develop asthma compared to children who don't. To elaborate a little bit more, according to a recent systematic review and meta-analysis on more than 8,000 children, this was published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology. Researchers concluded by saying that, quote, raw milk may have a protective association with allergy development, end quote. Now, the third out of 5 benefits of drinking raw milk, this is going to be improving the health of your skin. Raw milk supplies, as we've talked about, it supplies your body with probiotics. These probiotics in raw milk can kill off or balance bad bacteria in your gut. This can dramatically affect the health of your skin because, as we know, beauty is from the inside out. And if you want to heal your skin, you got to heal your gut first. And the quality of your skin is a direct reflection of what's going on in your gut. So if you're suffering from dry skin, acne, psoriasis, eczema, you got to focus on healing the gut. It's not something that putting a topical cream on your skin is really going to address. You got to address what's going on in the gut and repopulating your good gut bacteria. Now, to reiterate what I'm saying, this is confirmed by research. Studies have shown that inflammation and unbalanced gut flora contribute to skin issues such as acne and eczema. This just goes to show that when you are providing your body with good probiotics that you can get from fermented raw milk that hasn't been pasteurized, non-homogenized, you can help the health of your gut, which is going to help the health of your skin. Another way that raw milk is going to help the health of your skin is that it contains healthy fats. Because raw milk contains large amounts of healthy saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, omega-3 fats, it supports skin hydration. This is something that I've noticed. As much raw dairy as I've consumed over the years, I've really noticed the health of my skin has drastically improved because of this. Now, the fourth benefit is that raw milk might be able to help eradicate H. pylori infection. There's a lot of incredible science showing that this is the case, and many anecdotes have shown this as well. Now, sometimes H. pylori causes no symptoms, but some people who develop H. pylori do develop uncomfortable symptoms, and it's shown in scientific literature that it's improved when individuals consume raw milk because of the beneficial bacteria that it contains. Now, the fifth tip here is that raw milk might be an antibacterial agent helping to fight infection. Now, this flies in the face of everything that you might have heard because all we hear in the media is that raw milk is problematic with unhealthy, bad bacteria, E. coli, Salmonella, Brucella, all these pathogenic bacteria. But remember what I talked about at the beginning of this conversation. Physicians, doctors, and traditional cultures have used raw milk as far back as we can trace for millennia to help heal conditions, improve inflammation, improve ulcers. And modern science is finally catching up with ancient wisdom. And it's showing that raw milk has antimicrobial, antibacterial, and antiparasitic effects, contrary to popular belief. Now, with all that being said, I am not here to convince you to drink raw milk. I'm just here to lay out the risk versus reward ratio and help you to understand that the risk is blown way out of proportion and the reward is not talked about enough. And if you want to consume raw milk, what I would recommend is starting with fermented raw dairy products like kefir, yogurt, and aged cheese, because these are traditional preparation methods that cultures have done to minimize any potential pathogenic bacteria and also increase the probiotic load that these dairy products contain. And so this is going to be very individualized across the board. And dairy is not for everybody. And raw dairy might not work for you, and that's okay. And with all that being said, I would love to hear your favorite takeaway. Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll talk to you next time. Mitochondria are the power plants of our cells that take the food that we eat, the air we breathe, the oxygen that we breathe, and turn that into energy. And so if you are out there currently feeling pretty crappy, not energized, not feeling that well, how do we go about feeling good?